Hello everyone, welcome back to Desks and Dorks. Before you watch this video, it's important for you to know something. I have been wrestling back and forth with the copyright holder for the original video movie that we talk about here, which is The Black Death with Sean Bean. Apparently everybody is cool with it except for Sony Italy, which refuses to let me either recreate or transform footage from a 14-year-old movie that did not do very well at the box office because I thought it did very well to illustrate some points about combat. So you're going to hear a lot of serious narration over stock footage of people having pillow fights because that's the best thing that we could do. And I'll be honest, this video has taken a crap ton of work and I love the script and I love everything about it. And I just don't love that I have to tangle with Sony Italy for like whatever. So Sony Italy, if you're watching this, screw you. Everybody else, enjoy the video and the pillow fights. There's a heartbreaking scene in the 2010 film The Black Death starring Sean Bean. In this movie, a group of medieval knights has been essentially charged with carrying out the execution of a suspected witch and the removal of a suspected necromancer in a medieval village during the height of the Black Plague. During their journey, one of the men stops and considers what's going on with his dear friend, only to find out that this person has been infected with the disease for longer than he was willing to let on. And, in his fear and perhaps in his desire to not die, has potentially exposed both himself and everyone else in the expedition to the illness as well. There's an incredible moment where all of the men take a second. There's no dialogue, there's no anything. They look at each other, and then finally Sean Bean's character says that his journey comes to an end here. What I love about this movie, and what I love about this scene in particular, are that these characters, despite the fact that they are knights, quote-unquote, and heroes, quote-unquote, they feel incredibly vulnerable and incredibly human. Despite the fact that they are given the moniker that we give to our own fantasy heroes, they are every bit as fragile and every bit as mortal as you or me or anyone else. And it got me thinking a little bit about why I think that low-level campaigns are the best. Hello, I'm Kyle Ott, and welcome to Desks and Dorks. We're going to get through this intro very quickly. 1, like, share, comment, subscribe. Specifically share. This video took way longer than I thought it was going to take, and I would really appreciate it if it does the numbers that are commiserate with the work that it took. 2, if you really, really want to help us out, the links are in the description below to purchase any of our RPGs if you like those. It is literally how I keep the lights on, and so I would sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much. So why do I think low level is the best, and why do I use, or at least bring up, the conceit of The Black Death, the movie, as what inspired me to make this video? Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. In low-level campaigns, it's the fragility of the characters that lends strength and I think ultimately weight to everything that a person does. And again, this is why I love it. See, in a low-level campaign, you are far more likely to get destroyed or permanently injured, and because the consequences are so much higher, it lends much greater weight to what you are doing. And as a GM, and as somebody that designs role-playing games, I want to figure out how to add additional weight and consequence to what my players are doing, which is exactly why I made this video. So, like I said before, a person is way more likely to consider their options when death is permanent, when it is swift, when it is frequent. One of my favorite stories that I've ever gotten to take part of in a role-playing game campaign was we were in a village, and I am doing a 3-5 campaign for a bunch of people who were used to playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. They were used to having multiple death saving throws. They were used to having tons of hit points. They were used to an edition that didn't necessarily hold their hand, but definitely made it so much easier by sanding off all of the rough edges of all the tables so that when they went running and hit their head, it wasn't a permanent piece of damage. Well, they were stalking a cult, and then, well, lo and behold, what happened? But a player was like, hey, do you know where the cult is? To a bunch of random people that he had never met before. This resulted in someone being like, yeah, I know exactly where the cult is. Come with me. I'm so glad you're here, hero. Let me take you. I will show you exactly where they are. And it turns out they were part of the cult, and as a result, that hero was stabbed to death unceremoniously in a part of town far away from the rest of their compatriots. For the rest of that game, my players considered very carefully what they did and who they did it with. So what does that look like as a GM? you should punish and reward players for who they choose to trust. Remember, as adventurers, players are in many ways outsiders to an area, and I don't care what game or what system you're running, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or especially, I think this actually lends itself much more to games like Vaesen or Call of Cthulhu, where you are essentially an investigator or a monster hunter, or even, for example, Band of Blades, where you're a hero on the run, on the ropes from what is happening. But the player should be punished and rewarded depending on who they trust. If a player, like my player in the story that I mentioned, is unwise about who they're working with or what they're doing, then they should be punished accordingly. Sometimes that could be with the loss of property, items, for example, are a great way to do this. Or if you're playing something like the Savage Worlds system, marking exhaustion or wear and tear is a great way to punish a player for making a bad decision, but you should also reward them. If somebody in your team is very smart and they vet the trust of an NPC, then you should, as a game master, give them some sort of reward, either information that will help them on their main quest, or monetary compensation, or even special items. All of that is good. However, as a game master, this is very, very important. You need to give players space to explore their grief over the loss of a character. And I'm not just talking about their own, because in a low-level campaign, it is entirely possible for a character to die very quickly or to lose an NPC they care about very quickly. It means that death is going to be frequent. As a game master, I think it's essential that you, and I think we, just in general, give players the space to explore that grief. Players are going to get attached to the characters that you make. They are going to get attached to their character. And even if they've only had a character or known an NPC for a very short period of time, it's still appropriate and a good idea to give them the space to explore their feelings about that. And in fact, I think it's going to lead to a much greater sense of immersion among your players when you have a funeral for a character in game that they have all grown to love and appreciate. And lastly, give them some sort of small bonus in the world for building these relationships. The last thing that you want in a low-level campaign is to take all of the hope away from your players, because when you do that, it becomes not fun to play. It should, and it can, be a very dark, devastating, gritty world full of darkness and people committing, absolute acts of atrocity. But there should be a silver lining, because at the core of every good role-playing game is relationship building, and you want to encourage those players, even if it's dangerous, especially if it's dangerous, to go out and make those kinds of relationships. Give them some sort of bonus in-game. It doesn't have to be huge, but just enough of a carrot to dangle in front of them that they're going to want to engage with your world, engage with your characters, engage with the things that you have sort of laid out, before them. And then once that is done, they're going to want to do those things on their own anyway. But again, just because something is hopeless doesn't mean there's not a shred of a chance that it will turn out okay. And that's really what you want to make sure that the players still have, no matter what type of campaign you're running. Now, another reason that I really wanted to talk about the Black Death is the fight choreography and the fight scenes. These are, again, despite being quote-unquote knights, these are not the kind of shining heroes or chivalric warriors that are like, ah, yes, madame, and saves, a woman and kisses the back of her hand and then doves fly away everywhere. These men are dirty, they are ragged, they are tired, and they are brutal. And it's awesome to watch. These are not people who pull their punches in a fight. These are not people who, pull anything in a fight. This particular fight scene in general, I don't even know if I can show some of this on YouTube for fear of, me not ever being able to monetize this video. But in this fight scene, they're blocking, they're punching, they're throwing rocks. At one point, you watch a man take his teeth and literally bite a chunk out of another dude's neck. It is awesome. These are not people who are concerned with honor or chivalry or the rules of engagement. They are literally killers on both sides, concerned with only one thing, and that is getting to live to see the next sunrise. It is that level of brutality in combat that you should make use of in your low-level campaigns. And it's, again, part of the reason why I think low-level campaigns and low-level games in general are the best, because when a player is engaging, they are forced to be brutal because death is around every single corner. Again, just to borrow off of Dungeons & Dragons because it's a popular system, a 15th level fighter has hit points to spare in an armor class that might as well make them a bank vault in terms of how impenetrable they are. However, a first level warrior has barely enough hit points to survive being sneezed on by a dragon too hard, and pretty much has enough armor to, you know, maybe not get murdered immediately in pitched combat, but they have so much more to lose, and it is so much easier for them to lose it. And I think, as game masters, not only is that an incredibly interesting place to start with, but I think there are ways that we, as game masters, can make low-level or high-stakes combat even more interesting. So I've actually divided this into 2 levels. There is the level 1, or the simple things that you can do. And the first one I want to say is you should limit the survivability that players have. This is hugely important. Also, by the way, shout out to Shadow the Demon Lord for this absolutely grotesque piece of artwork. This man's skeleton is ripping himself apart. That's rad. But again, something that you should take into account, limit the survivability of their players. If your system uses hit points, cap the number of hit points. Lower the damage reduction that they get from armor if you're playing a game like the Dragon Age role-playing game, which I still hold is like one of the best RPGs of all time. If you're a TTRPG fan, shout out to Green Ronin Games for making that. Or increase the chances that certain things can outright destroy them. Also, you should remove anything that allows a player to come back from the brink of death or from death itself mid-combat. Healing magic should be something that takes place in towns. Medicine should be expensive and hard to get. These are things that the players should have very limited access to. And again, the more you increase combat, the more you're going to make it impactful to the player. Now, this is level 2 of the Brutality, and actually, as an illustration of that, the same campaign where I had that person get ripped to shreds because they decided to engage in the world's worst reconnaissance, that group of players actually lured several of the enemies to an abandoned building where they took care of them, and they made sure that they'd left just enough of a trail so that the cultist search party would come looking, and they all stationed themselves on the rooftops of abandoned buildings. And then when the cult actually came to the abandoned building that they had taken out the initial wave of enemies in, they were actually pinned down on all 4 sides by the other players. It was awesome to watch them, A, set up this ambush, and B, because we were playing not fast and loose with the rules, but because we were playing it like, hey, you are all several hundred feet away from each other, so if you yell, they're going to know. It was incredible to watch my players use bits of scrap glass to essentially use light signals to signal the ambush. It is awesome. That level of brutality is great, and again, if the players know the consequences are there, they're more willing to engage in that kind of stuff. Again, raise that bar, make your players reach for it, because 9 times out of 10, your players will absolutely rise to the occasion. Now, for level 2, injuries for the players should become permanent. There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this. For example, you could have scars that make it harder for a player to interact, or that limit vision or other abilities like touch, for example. I have a friend who is a machinist and a mechanic, and he has scar tissue on his right hand because one of his digits got caught in not a threshing machine, but essentially that. And so it makes it very difficult for him to use that hand for certain types of tasks. You can replicate real life injuries that players might actually be familiar with in the real world, in your game. Twisted limbs can make it hard for you to move or attack. The loss of senses and abilities should and can be a real threat. Imagine, for example, your player loses the ability to see. What does that look like from a role-playing standpoint? And what does that look like from a gameplay standpoint? I didn't include any specific gameplay changes here, because I think as a GM, that should be up to you, but it is an important thing to consider. And last but certainly not least, enemy abilities should be really dangerous to the point that there are certain abilities that, if not treated properly, can end a player's existence. So, for example, poison being turned to stone, a wasting curse, and the cures for these things should be either expensive, B, slow, or C, both of those things. Now, here's the thing. As brutal as this world is, and as much as I have, I should have said, waxed philosophically about my love for consequence-heavy combat and for dangerous decision-making, it is very important that, much like this early witch trial in the Black Death, your game does not become like this. And so I want to go over what I think are the 3 brutal commandments. When I run low power games or low power campaigns of any system, doesn't matter what system I'm running, these are the 3 things that have always made it so that my players feel engaged rather than frustrated, and feel like they have bought into this world rather than they are just being tossed about by the world. And so here are the 3 things I would heavily encourage you to do if you are planning on implementing a dangerous, low-level style game, regardless of the RPG system that you're working with. 1, the rules that you impose must also affect you. This is the most critical thing. If you take nothing else from this video, please remember this. If, for example, it's possible for your players to get their arms chopped off or crippled, then it is something that they can and should be able to do to your monsters. So again, this means that A, the players understand the system, B, they have taken in the system and they've learned about it, and C, they're using it against you. This is working as intended. You want the players to do this because once the players realize, oh, all of the brutal stuff that you do to us, we can do to others, then they're going to have some buy-in. And again, you should reward this. This isn't a good thing. You want to make sure that fairness exists on both sides. There is sometimes, especially in really brutal role-playing games, a tendency for GMs to take an us versus them mentality. This is not true no matter what type of game that you are running. You are a facilitator of a story and a referee of a system of games that should be as impartial as possible. We are not the 2024 Supreme Court. We are impartial in our games. Please make sure that you act accordingly and that the rules apply both to the player but also apply to you. Abilities don't have to be immediately explained, but they should be discernible. What do I mean by that? Well, to illustrate this, I actually went to one of my favorite games of all time, a game called Fear and Hunger. Now, Fear and Hunger, for those of you who haven't played it, is a very dark game that comes with a laundry list of content warnings. Actually, laundry list is not even close. It's more like a CVS receipt of content warnings. It is a parchment that you can roll out and it is still going like a football field's worth of length of content warnings, okay? Please make sure that if you check out anything by Fear and Hunger, you read those content warnings and you read them good, because boy oh boy will it mess you up if you are unprepared. Much like it messed up this Dark Priest character who has been, had his head removed by our good friend the Crow Mauler. Why do I bring up this game, however? Fear and Hunger is an incredibly obtuse game in that it does not explain a lot of its rules, but it does allow the player to figure them out, given trial and error, and given even base level observation. So for example, it is a traditional turn-based combat game, but unlike most traditional combat games where you only have one target to attack, in this case a Crow Mauler, you actually can attack any of the Crow Mauler's limbs and its torso. This means that certain monsters, for example, you may have noticed the Crow Mauler's lovely giant mace arm. This means that for some monsters, taking out a critical limb is a very important way to deal with a powerful monster. The players can figure this out because, much like them, much like the monsters, players can also have their own limbs attacked or different parts of their body attacked. Again, this is not explained. There's no tutorial for Fear and Hunger, but again, if you have played it for any length of time, you can discern what those abilities do. Thus, it is discernible and explainable. And lastly, the rewards for a player's brutality should be equal to the penalty for their mistakes. I've used the example of my players in our 3-5 campaign going up against those cultists a lot because I think it's a great example, because the players were initially really put off by the way that I had dealt with that character. I had warned them before the campaign started that things were going to be very brutal and very hard to deal with. One player did not take that seriously, and a lot of them were taken aback when his character was killed off in unceremonious fashion. However, once they realized, oh, we can do the same thing and get rewarded for it, all of a sudden the buy-in was there. Your players should feel like this world is brutal, unfair, maybe even dark in places. However, they should also feel like if it's brutal, let's make it brutal for them. If it's unfair, let's stack the deck in our favor. And if it's dark, let's be the darkness ourselves and do it for a good cause. That is how you get some good buy-in from your players. But again, if you are going to run a campaign that is low level but high stakes, and again, I think that's that's the reason I love the low level campaigns, is because it's high stakes, because the players know they can die at any single instant, because there's no get out of jail free magic powers at lower levels, no matter what system you're running. Because of those things, I think the players are going to have a little bit more buy-in, but again, that buy-in is only going to last if they are rewarded for doing the same kind of things that the rest of the world is trying to do to them. Now, again, I may have painted this like it's a little bit too grim and a little bit too dark, but there should always be a shred of hope in this. Remember, your players are heroes. They just happen to be heroes who want to see the next sunrise, just like the characters in 2010's A Black Death. Thank you all so much for watching this. This brings us to the end of this video today. If you have liked this, like, share, comment, subscribe. Again, specifically share. Helps out a ton. Buy our games and be good to one another. That's pretty much it. Kyle at For Desks and Dorks. You've been awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.